Okay, so the data center industry, it's required to be both sustainable and digital. So, net zero is where it's supposed to be, or it is focusing, but it's also got to provide all this digital infrastructure that we all want for all our devices and, the AI explosion, etc. I guess the first question is that a fair sort of expectation that the industry can fulfill both sort of tasks equally well?
I think it's certainly a challenge, particularly for organisations to kind of balance their growth aspirations with the sustainability objectives and the commitments that they've made. But it's also an opportunity for innovation. So we're seeing some great opportunities to apply kind of new alternative solutions and new technologies. And it's clear that our customers have that drive and ambition to succeed. They publish their own commitments in in the area of sustainability. But they're also committing to kind of the industry-wide initiatives like the Climate Neutral Data Centre Pact, and kind of lining up with legislation such as the Energy Efficiency Directive for Europe. But we do recognise that there's a need to do more to raise awareness of what data centres are there for, what the purpose is, and what the benefits they can bring, and particularly kind of from a community, for a community, kind of what benefit the data centre can bring to their local community.
Yeah, so I was going to ask, did you think the data industry needs to get more on the front foot in that particular way, and not only, if you like, tell people what they're already doing, but engage more fully, shall we say, in with their local communities, so the data center isn't regarded as this horrific, sort of energy guzzling box in the corner of an industrial site or whatever, but it's actually, a sort of good citizen contributing many positive things, as well as obviously it does consume power. You can't hide that, but the net gain potentially is good for everyone. Does it need to do more of that, I suppose?
Yeah, absolutely. I think success is going to be dependent on communication. So it's making sure the data center operators are communicating with planners and governments and local communities to kind of really communicate the benefits that they can bring. But they also need to take more consideration of the communities that they're going to sit in, as I mentioned earlier. But they need to think about what the challenges are that the local community has, and then think about how the data center development can help to address them. So what can they do to become a more attractive neighbour? What can they do to change perceptions? And as you say, not be seen purely as a large consumer of a constrained resource, but actually bringing that benefit. So that really needs to start from the site identification stage with development. So kind of what ideally they're going to be looking for sites where they've got good access to clean energy, renewable energy, and an adjacent heat demand would be ideal. So something like a large residential development, or potentially kind of greenhouses, or an industry that's kind of aligned in that the industry is something that needs a lot of the processes that they use and that could potentially be supported by the data center. And if you get a large enough data center plot, there's obviously the opportunity to incorporate some of these functions and land uses within that development itself.
Okay, and in terms of Arup, your sort of involvement or your perspective, if you like, on the industry, just be good to understand. I know there's various ways in which you are contributing, or can contribute. And first one, I think, is sort of nature when it comes to, I suppose, at the earliest stage in the process of boosting biodiversity and nature-based design solutions. So perhaps you can just explain a bit more, what that would look like, or what it does look like.
Yes, that's right. So our clients are very enthusiastic about this. We're seeing a number of the big operators that we work with kind of putting in place their own commitments around biodiversity they want to drive forward. So they're investing in trials of some new technologies. They're actually implementing a number of them, just like kind of vertical meadows or green facades on buildings. And kind of what really works well here is when kind of you look at an intelligent design that integrates that development into the main design of the building itself, so you're minimizing the additional cost and embodied carbon associated with those extras. I mean, a great example is when we can take an ex-industrial brownfield site that's really kind of got nothing there. Maybe it's just a large concrete area that's got nothing happening at the moment, and through data center development, actually make a really big difference and real significant improvement in the biodiversity.
Okay, and decarbonisation, I mean, I guess that's one of the biggest challenges for the sector, and everyone talks about net zero, but I don't know, do you have a definition, or is there an agreed definition of what net zero actually means, and what are, the key areas for reduction intervention? How do people get there as well, I guess?
Yeah, so net zero really requires us to consider both the construction and the operational carbon impact of development. So it really needs to start at the very beginning of the design process. So ideally, you build like a whole life carbon assessment model of the design at the very start of the design process. And then as the design evolves, you use that model to then inform decisions around design and the materials you're going to use and the products that you're going to use, and really kind of give it kind of almost like an equal balance against cost and program commitments. you need to think about kind of the operational carbon impact of the facilities as well. And so kind of we take kind of a stage process here where the first thing is really to, kind of your first step has got to be to reduce the amount of energy consuming. So that's making sure that your power systems and cooling systems are as energy efficient as you can develop them. And then you need to look at kind of how much energy can you generate on the site. So could you look at kind of on-site renewables, or kind of a direct wire connection to potentially there's like a renewable power solution nearby that you could have direct private wire connection to that. And then your third option then is to go down the power purchase agreement arrangement, where you're obviously buying that renewable power, but obviously you really want to push for clear additionality with that, rather than it being just an existing capacity that you're purchasing. You need to think about kind of your backup solutions for the site as well. So what can you do in terms of a carbon-free backup solution? Could you go for a battery-based solution if you've got confidence in the reliability of the grid, the location of connecting into it? Would you go for like a hydrogen-based solution? If you're going to go down the generator route, then can you make sure that you're using things like kind of hydro-treated vegetable oil as an alternative fuel? You need to think about if you are in a location where the climate and your loads require you to use a refrigeration solution, then making sure that those refrigerants that you select in the product that you're selecting are using low global warming potential refrigerants to minimize the impact that you can have from that chemical as well. So kind of once you've minimized the emissions as far as you can, you've minimized your dependence upon offsets, and then the final kind of bit that's left over is a bit that you can use offsets to cover. And one of the kind of considerations here is around the plant life cycle. So if you think about over the life cycle of a data center building, you'll have a number of kind of plant replacement cycles, kind of your cooling plant or your UPSs will reach the end of their life cycle before the end of the facility's life cycle. So you will need to replace those, but what can you do to kind of extend the life of those items? Because the fewer number of those plant replacement cycles you have to go through, the smaller the amount of embodied carbon you're committing to that development. So kind of making sure that kind of you plan preventive and maintenance cycles are kind of really in place and really looking after this equipment, and then looking at options to refurb or repair rather than replace is your first option. And then linked to that, and then also the circularity angle as well. So making sure the materials that you use on the site, that you can keep them as high up the value chain as you can. And we've got a number of manufacturers that are out there now which are really kind of interested in recovering equipment from facilities once they're reaching the end of their life cycle for the data center use, taking them back, refurbing them, and then potentially taking them off to a different industry as a reuse equipment.
Okay, and you, I think, touched, I can't remember if it's then or previously, talked about brownfield sites and the opportunity. Sorry, it was the biodiversity, wasn't it? Yeah. But in terms of repurposing assets, I mean, I guess that's the classic case. Someone, there's an industrial, I guess, Slough, for example, there was a lot of industrial buildings no longer required, and the whole data center industry seemed to, decamp there for at least a while.
Yeah.
So, but are there other opportunities when it comes to repurposing assets, or is the classic, it's a warehouse or an industrial unit, put a data center, or can people get a bit more sort of creative, shall we say, when it comes to repurposing?
Yeah, so I mean, as you say, like the reuse of kind of warehouse type facilities is almost like an easy win, and traditionally that's where data centers take a lot of their work, particularly down south, as you mentioned. But then in terms of kind of reuse, don't forget the kind of like for the next generation of data centers, being able to reuse existing data centers is even more efficient than the kind of ready got facility it's part of the way to where you want to get to, so you can minimize the impact that way. You can we've done some work on kind of, as you say, kind of thinking a bit further out, kind of. If you think about kind of the North Sea, one of the things we looked at was reusing oil rigs. If you imagine as you were kind of like the extraction of oil and gas, which you can be declining in the North Sea, and therefore there could be a number of these oil rigs that are no longer needed for what they were originally intended for. So we did kind of just a thought piece to think about kind of if you looked at that as an idea, what are the pros and cons of that as a development idea, and kind of some of the positives that you've got access to subsea fibers potentially, you've got access to offshore wind and wave power. With power generation, you've got cold wind, you've got seawater cooling to help you with the cooling, and then potentially even kind of using the system for kind of carbon storage potentially as well. I mean, it's a bit of an extreme option, and it doesn't appeal for a lot of data center operators, but it's just looking at kind of there's lots of buildings that are out there and facilities that are not required in the way they were, and how can we think about reusing those for data center development.
Okay, and then a subject dear to our, because I do some work in the water industry as well as the data center industry, and obviously power is what everyone focuses on, but then there is water usage of effectiveness as well, isn't there? I think WUE, which people look at, and I guess we're talking here obviously how the water in this data centers is used, but also things like sustainable drainage, green roofs, rainwater harvesting. So again, what have you done, or what is, should the industry be looking at? What's possible when it comes to water?
Yes, we're seeing a lot more interest in rainwater harvesting systems and sustainable drainage systems. So it's type solutions, they're becoming a lot more common. And what kind of really works is when you take that site and campus level view at the very beginning of the development to think about how you can really incorporate these elements into the design in a positive way. So we've seen some really good examples where we've looked at using kind of wetlands, ponds and swales as part of your drainage solution, but also using them to bring in additional biodiversity to the site, but then also providing them a passive security measure to the site as well. So if you think about these things in the very early stages, you can really get multiple benefits from incorporating them into your design.
And we have to talk about energy, obviously, because that's if you like, what data centers are known for, requiring quite a lot of. But clearly, there's already developments when it comes to off-site renewables. Microgrids are perhaps gaining in popularity, and you've also got alternative. I think you mentioned HVOs, alternative fuel sources. So, give us a sort of flavour or a snapshot of what's possible, and maybe some of the things that are still to be considered, which could have a role to play.
Yeah, so as you say, so there is a rapid growth going on in the data center market at the moment, being driven by AI, and that really is pushing up the energy demand. I mean, there's been a lot of press around the big energy deals that are going on in the US between data center operators and power generation companies out there. In some locations, the challenge isn't all about generation. So in the UK, as an example, a lot of our challenges around the transmission of power rather than the generation capacity. So there's some different challenges to deal with there. But there's certainly a growing interest in going beyond our purchase agreements to more direct links between the data centers themselves and the generators. So we're working closely within Arup. We have teams that work directly in the energy industry, and then we have other teams that work in the data center teams. We make sure those teams are kind of talking to each other, so there's the potential for these developments to kind of collaborate and tie these things together to try and support that. And there's also the opportunity for data centers to really support the grid. So through UPSs and battery backup solutions, being able to kind of provide support services back to the grid when the grid's under stress, or even taking load with the backup systems you have on a data center site, being able to take some load off the grid at times of kind of peak demand to just give the grid a bit more of a chance to cope with the demands that it's facing and difficult experiences. But there's a lot of interest in small modular reactors, the small nuclear reactors, and hydrogen. We've done quite a few studies for clients around the kind of where is that technology in terms of its development cycle, when is it likely to be available to the market, and then what are the challenges and timelines likely to be around permitting in different locations. So we're doing that kind of work on a European level and also on a global level and advising our customers. I mean, there's a lot of really exciting and interesting stuff going on in this area, and Microsoft are probably the most visible in terms of what they put out into the press and released to people like this. I mean, you've probably seen that they've done a number of trials around the use of hydrogen. They're making some commitments around small modular reactors, and there's the exciting kind of options they've committed to collaborating on for a geothermally powered data center in Kenya, which is an exciting opportunity.
And I've certainly heard once or twice the suggestion that when it comes to microgrids, for example, the data center industry could almost help. You mentioned obviously it's not so much the amount of power, but it's the power transmission network. The idea that maybe data centers could almost build out some of this infrastructure via microgrids, and then at some sort of unspecified time in the future, if you like, the power transmission folks could almost adopt those assets at some stage. Is that a sort of likely or practical sort of scenario, do you think?
I think it's certainly being talked about, and it does occur in some places outside of Europe. It's happening a bit more. So if you've got particularly kind of unstable kind of grid, then some of these data center operators are willing to commit significant amounts of money to the network and their own network and microgrid type arrangements to be able to kind of give themselves that stability to overcome the short-term challenges that the local networks are going through. So there is work going on in that area, and I think there's probably more that's going to come in the near future because of the scale of these developments and the demands that they have.
And I guess it's difficult to summarize the progress made, but I'm going to ask you anyway, in terms of whether you give them a score out of whatever, or just as to how much the industry you think has achieved to date compared to what more sort of needs to be done, can be done. How would you characterize where the industry is right now, I suppose?
Yeah, so I'd say some great progress has been made, and there's like the commitments that our customers have put out there, put out into the industry, kind of really demonstrate their awareness of the importance of the sustainability agenda. But there's clearly more that can be done. There's more that needs to be done. So it feels like renewable energy is now embedded as kind of a fundamental of data center development. So kind of whenever anybody's looking at this and they're looking at where they can find that renewable power, they're making those commitments. I think more can be done in terms of on-site generation. It's unlikely you're going to be able to generate all the power you need for a data center and using renewables in a reasonable footprint. I think there's more opportunities around kind of that private wire connection. If you've got a wind farm adjacent to the development or a PV development in near proximity, can you get a private wire connection? Can you invest directly in those things to kind of grow the capacity that they have? And that plays back again into that idea of kind of your power purchase agreements needing to commit to additionality. Embodied carbon, I think, is still a relatively new concept for a number of data center operators, but there's clearly a growing awareness. And the supply chains are catching up with kind of the environmental product declaration. Is the availability of that kind of information is a lot better than it was. Scope 3 emissions is still, that's probably the part of the carbon picture that's probably the hardest for people to get their heads around at the moment. I think there's a need for kind of more industry-wide kind of agreement on how you approach it, how you measure it, what falls into which category, and kind of getting that aligned. I think there's clearly more work to be done there. Grid decarbonisation is really interesting in that as the electricity grids become decarbonised, there's going to be more of a focus on that embodied carbon. So we really need to start getting our heads around what that means now, because it's going to be more important going forward. And then, as we talked about earlier, kind of this idea of involving communities and development of these data centers, getting them involved from the very beginning so we can understand what their needs are, what the challenges that they face are at the community level, and making sure then that you kind of create a kind of a vision and a development for a site that incorporates kind of the nature targets, the biodiversity targets, and bring us the commercial into sort of the community benefits from the data center itself. So kind of, as I said, kind of ex-industrial type sites where you've got that opportunity for additional heating connection potentially, and which can bring lower energy costs to a local community.
And in terms of that sort of future you've outlined there, do you think, I'm always struck that the industry I won't say it's conservative, but you know, understandably, it's there for a reason, and it's obviously terrified of downtime, so maybe slightly nervous of innovation for that reason. But do you think the industry can kind of carry on at the current rate of change and progress, or do you think there needs to be a bit of a revolution, radical change, you know, sort of almost throwing out the accepted rules and regulations and sort of come a bit left field, as you say, you know, whether it's oil rigs, etc. Does it need to go that far, or can it kind of carry on tweaking things every so often and get to net zero? Or, as I say, it just needs to go, do you know what? This is a big issue. It needs a complete, you know, change of mindset, and let's head off in that direction.
Yeah, I don't think it needs a fundamental change. I think the foundation's there, the intent is there. I think the need is really for greater focus on kind of what sustainability means and what it needs from the very beginning of the process. So that, as I was sort of talking about, like really thinking about it from the site selection process and then through the design and through the construction. I think the scale of developments is going to mean that kind of like data center developers really need to start talking to energy generators and transmission networks really early in the development. If we think about these kind of multi-hundred megawatt capacity campuses that are out there, in some cases going up to a gigawatt plus, kind of that is a huge demand for any country to kind of manage, and for any transmission network to demand. So those conversations need to happen as early as possible to really start thinking about how increasing networks can accommodate them. As I said, there's some very large deals going on the generation side in the US, and a lot of these big data center operators are now making or placing orders or commitments with the small modular reactor developers in the US. I think it will probably be something that rolls out in the US first and then potentially roll out every year, but that could be quite a big opportunity for a step change in the carbon impact of data centers. And I think, as I said before, kind of this idea of trying to find these ideal sites where you can combine kind of a renewable source with a heat demand on a brownfield site, and you have something that kind of provide something back to the community. Like, could you provide more in terms of kind of community space and more kind of areas for kind of parkland or nature walks, or is there like a need in that community? Maybe they need kind of some community spaces where they can do activities, things like that. Kind of these things could potentially be built into a slightly larger data center campus.
Okay, and then I last question. I mean, politics does come into data center industry a little bit, regardless. But obviously, there's a shall we say, there's a growing pushback from various sort of quarters against maybe not, denying climate change exists, but saying that, it can't be allowed to get in the way of big business and growing markets, etc. Do you have any concerns? I mean, the data industry, obviously, a lot of it's bankrolled by the finance sector, which may or may not be, excited that they might not have to be as, shall we say, sustainability focused. The question is, I suppose, are you nervous at all that people might lessen their commitment to sustainability in the sector because, if you like, there being some political sort of opportunity to go down that route, shall we say, if you get my drift?
Yeah, so I mean, I don't see our customers are going to be dropping their commitments. I think they've demonstrated they've got a desire to do better than legislation is asking for. They really want to push things ahead. I think there have been some delays in the timelines for delivery of the objectives that they've set themselves, which were always very challenging. They haven't, the pace of growth has made that a little bit more challenging than they had been when they committed to them. But the commitment is still there, and I think ultimately their goals remain in place. And it's just that they're going to have to slightly push back some of the timelines they originally targeted. The rush for AI has created some challenges for the industry, but I think as an industry we have the knowledge, the skills, the experience, and the commitment and drive to really find the right solutions to make these things work better than they do at the moment. And that kind of push on the nuclear deals in the US, which are going on right now, there's a lot going on there in that area at the moment. I think that's kind of a really good example of where these commitments are still important. These people are making big commitments over a long term to make sure they're getting kind of renewable power rather than going down the gas-fired solution.
I suppose just finally, are you an optimist when it comes to the future? I started with sustainable and digital. Is that achievable? Did you genuinely think that is, or do you feel that at some stage there'll have to be an element of compromise? We'll either all be told that we can only have, so many digital devices, or we can only use them for so long, or dare I say, the big business will be told that it has to slightly rein itself up, which is sounds unlikely. But do you think there will have to be combat, or we can satisfy both the sustainability and digital imperatives, shall we say?
So I think it's challenging, but there's clearly an opportunity here for new technologies and new kind of ideas and new designs that can really make a difference. I think I'm an optimist. Yeah, I believe that we can do this, but it will take commitment and drive from people. And the customers who've got that drive, it's just kind of, and they do what they want to do in the timelines that are available. I guess it's a challenge.
Okay, it's been great to chat, Gareth, and some brilliant insights into what's going on. And yeah, thank you very much for your time. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.